Now, would you please open your Bible and turn with me to 2 Samuel chapter 19. 2 Samuel 19. As you turn there, let me remind you of what we're doing. We have a brief mini-series that we're going through morning and evening about officer nominations. The session has said that we want to provide some help in the looking for of right men for office, for elder and deacon. And there's a good reason we're turning to 2 Samuel chapter 19. That's because not only we, but even here, even after the death of Absalom, his unsuccessful military coup, God's people again are looking for God's man. And what we'll see again with David is that he certainly is a man with heart. Before we read the text, let's ask the Lord to bless the reading, the preaching of his word together. Let's pray. Oh Lord, what we're about to do, we cannot without you. And so we pray, oh God, that you would work. May those, oh Lord, see wondrous things in your word. May we see and behold the greatness of our God, who declares to us his living and active word. We pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen. 2 Samuel chapter 19, beginning in verse 1, this is the word of God, where truth resides. Then it was told Joab, behold, the king is weeping and mourns from Absalom. The victory that day was turned to mourning for all the people. For the people heard it, said that the king is grieved for his son. So the people went by stealth into the city that day, as people who are humiliated steal away when they flee in battle. The king covered his face and cried out with a loud voice, "Oh, my son Absalom! Oh, Absalom, my son, my son!" Then Joab came into the house to the king and said, Today you have covered with shame the faces of all your servants, who today have saved your life and the lives of your sons and your daughters, the lives of your wives and the lives of your concubines, by loving those who hate you and by hating those who love you. For you have shown today that princes and servants are nothing to you. For I know this day that if Absalom were alive and all of us were dead today, then you would be pleased. Now therefore arise, go out and speak literally to the hearts of your servants. For I swear by the Lord, if you do not go out, surely not a man will pass the night with you. And this will be worse for you than all the evil that has come upon you from your youth until now. So the king arose and sat in the gate. When they told all the people, saying, Behold, the king is sitting in the gate, then all the people came before the king. Now Israel had fled, each to his tent, dispersed. Now all the people were quarreling throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, The king delivered us from the hand of our enemies and saved us from the hand of the Philistines, but now he has fled out of the land from Absalom. However, Absalom, whom we anointed over us, has died in battle. Now then, why are you silent about bringing the king back? Then King David said to Zadok and Abiathar the priests, saying, Speak to the elders of Judah, saying, Why are you the last to bring the king back to his house, since the word of all Israel has come to the king, even to his house? You are my brothers. You are my bone and my flesh. Why then should you be the last to bring back the king? Say to Amasa, Are you not my bone and my flesh? My God, may God do so to me, and more so, if you will not be commander of all the army before me continually in the place of Joab. Thus he turned the hearts of all the men of Judah as one man, So that they sent word to the king, saying, Return, return you and all your servants. The king then returned and came as far as the Jordan. And Judah came to Gilgal in order to go to meet the king, to bring the king across the Jordan. Then Shimei, the son of Gerar, the Benjamite, who was from Bahurim, hurried and came down with the men of Judah to meet King David. There were 1,000 men of Benjamin with him, with Ziba, the servant of the house of Saul, and his 15 sons and his 20 servants with him. And they rushed to the Jordan before the king. Then they kept crossing the ford to bring over the king's household and to do what was good in his sight. And Shimei, the son of Gera, fell down before the king as he was about to cross the Jordan. So he said to the king, Let not my lord consider me guilty, nor remember what your servant did wrong on the day when my lord the king came out from Jerusalem, so that the king would set it to heart. Literally set it, not take it, but set it to heart. For your servant knows that I have sinned. Therefore, behold, I have come today, the first of all the house of Joseph, to go down to meet my king, my lord and my king. But Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, said, Should not Shimei be put to death for this, because he cursed the Lord's anointed? Then David said, What have I to do with you, O sons of Zeruiah? That you should this day be an adversary to me. Should any man be put to death in Israel today? For do I not know that I am king over Israel today? The king said to Shimei, You shall not die. Thus the king swore to him. Amen. Thus far, the reading of God's holy, inspired, inerrant word may take that truth and write upon all our hearts. Well, we need to take up this subject of men with heart because we didn't finish last week. Yes, we finished with our particular text, but there's more to be said about a man with heart. A man with heart, just as a review from last week, we said, is a man whose heart is right now. That is, like David in the field had a right heart, and he was the man that God set apart to serve him. Right then, right there. Called to the office because he had a right heart before God. But then also, David showed himself to be a man with heart because he had courage to face the enemies of God, even giants like Goliath. David had heart. But that's not all there is to a man with heart. No, a man with heart has more. And this week, we're going to find out 2 more details about a man with heart. And for good reason. Because you need to know what kind of men you should be looking for to nominate. But then also, that men might stand up and lead this church. Now, I must say, by way of disclaimer and pastoral comment, I have loved to hear how the Lord has used these messages, both in the morning and the evening, to challenge us all. And even though we're talking about men for leadership, there's a lot of what we're talking about that applies to every one of us here, from the little ones to the old ones, from men and to women. It applies to us all. We need to hear this word about heart, because wouldn't it be wonderful if we didn't just have a session and a diaconate that were filled with men of heart, but everyone in the church was? Having the right heart right now, courage to face the enemy, and then these 2 more today? Wouldn't that be a wonderful church? Wouldn't that be a church you want to be a part of? It is. So this message is for us all today. 2 additional descriptions of a man with heart found in 2 Samuel 19, verses 1 through 23. First, number 1, to be a man of heart means you need to lead with your heart. Lead with your heart. Let's dive into the first part of our story. This is verses 1 through 14. Well, we pick up in verse 1, where Joab was told the king is weeping and mourns for Absalom. There's a dark cloud that has come over God's people. We find that out in verse 2, that even though David and his men won the victory over Absalom and the rebellion, the people are hearing that the king is weeping. The king is grieved for his son. And this is a profound effect in verse 3 upon the people, that though they had achieved a great military victory, they're ashamed. Verse 3, so the people went by stealth into the city that day, the people of Judah, as the people who are humiliated steal away when they flee in battle. They are ashamed. Picture here someone who's just fought a great battle, laid down his life, and now because of one man who is grieving over the enemy who has fallen, it changes everything. Kind of makes you think about Vietnam, doesn't it? Makes you think about other foreign wars too. The same sort of grief that people are feeling. Both those who are coming back and the populace. What is going on here? All because the king is grieving. Now let's just ask ourselves the question though. Why is the king grieving? Well, it shouldn't be that hard, right? Verse 4, his son has died. My son Absalom, oh Absalom, my son, my son. And it's a great grief to lose a child. And it's something that, though you may not like someone very much, you don't want that to happen even unto them. Those are dark days. Those are days that don't pass easily. That's enough to grieve. But there's even more depth to this grief, because why has Absalom died? It wasn't just some freak accident. No, remember the prophecy of Nathan. Why did he say that a sword shall not depart from David's house? Because David brought the sword to Bathsheba and Uriah's house. And David now is being punished. David is receiving the punishment, just a partial punishment. His whole family, his whole lineage is going to be wrought with strife and swords, the rattling of sabers, crossing of swords, because of David's sin. And that brings you even to a lower depth, doesn't it? I mean, it's not just that your son has died, but you caused that death. Have you ever been somewhere near there where your fault has brought about some great tragedy in other people's lives? There's many in here who have experienced tragedy, but I can't think of how they caused this directly. David did. And yet, in this moment, he has to understand this. The weight falls upon his shoulders. And he's grieving not just the loss of his son, but the loss that was caused by his sin. Boy, that is deep. That's a dark, dark cloud. That's why David is grieving. But then in verses 5 through 7, the text goes drastically in a different direction. Thinking of David in a dark cloud, dark spot, grieving, in walks Absalom, and he is bold. He's bolder than Nathan. And really, the text prepared us for this entry of Joab in verse 5, because in verse 1, it says, then it was told Joab, behold, the king is weeping, and mourns for Absalom. And really, verses 2 through 4 is a digression. It's going back to just fill out the details. And now in verse 5, we pick up with the current story. Joab bursts into the room, and he starts laying into the king, going hard. Now, just by way of comment here, Joab is one of those mysterious figures. you don't really know how to take Joab. Is he good or is he bad? Sometimes he preserves life, sometimes he takes life. You can read this later on. If you want to, keep reading this afternoon. You'll see Joab is a mysterious figure. But right now, regardless, there is a strong statement that Joab has for David. And he says in verse 5, look, plainly, you are to blame for this. Verse 5, today you have covered with shame the faces of all your servants who today have saved your life and the lives of your sons and your daughters and the lives of your wives and the lives of your concubines. I mean, everything's pointing to you. You. You are to blame. And verse 6, because you don't care for the people by loving those who hate you, by hating those who love you. For you have shown today that princes and servants are nothing to you. For I know this day that if Absalom were alive and all of us were dead today, then you would be pleased. You don't even care for the people that you're leading. You're just wrapped up in your grief for your son and your sin. You don't even think about the people here. More so in verse 7, if you don't stand up, you're a dead man. Verse 7, now therefore arise, go out and speak, literally, to the hearts of your servants. For I swear by the Lord, if you do not go out, surely not a man will pass the night with you, and this will be worse for you than all the evil that has come upon you from your youth until now. Whoa. Now imagine you're David for a minute. Just try and take this all in. Here you are, cowering in the corner. All you want as a result of your mistakes is just not to make another mistake, right? Just want to get in that corner, cover yourself with a warm blanket, cry and cry and cry because of what you've done. You don't want to do anything else. But then in walks Nathan, and he lays into you. Joab. Nathan. Joab just lays into you. It may catch you by surprise. It may even crush you, right? Because you're very much aware of your problem, what's going on. And yes, I did cause this. Yes, I know. Oh, no, now I messed up not only my son's life, but all the people. Oh, my goodness, what am I going to do? But what does David do in verse 8? So the king arose and sat in the gate. When they told all the people, saying, behold, the king is sitting in the gate, then all the people came before the king. Now this is huge. This is big. This is not the shell of a man in a corner cowering. This is a man somehow that has stood up. He's gathered himself, shaken off his tears, and he's stood up and he's positioning himself not in a removed palace, but in the gate before all the people. I don't know about you, but I'd be terrified, right? To go before the people that I have hurt and messed up. But David rises up and he repositions himself in a place of authority. More than that, we find out in the latter half of verse 8 all the way to verse 14 that he rallies the heart of the people. The people in the latter part of 8 and 10 is another digression. It's talking about the people. Now, Israel had fled to each one's tent. That means like current day today, that would be everyone, all the representatives in Washington, D.C. going back to their states. Not just on recess, because they're done. I'm done with it. We're going back to our own states, our own people. Here, Israel all went back. But they were gathered, and the reason they went back, is because there's a question. Verse 9, the king delivered us from the hand of the enemies and saved us from the hand of the Philistines, but now he's fled from the land of Absalom. However, Absalom, whom we have anointed over us, has died in battle. Now then, why are you silent about bringing the king back? Who's in charge here? The people of Judah weren't leading the king back in a proud procession. The victor has come back. The rightful king has entered his home. Let's all come together. No, there's a big question about it. What's the question? The leader's heart. The leader's heart is in question here. But then we see the leader's heart coming forth in verses 11 through 13. David then sent to Zadok and Abiathar, his two spies, and actually two very influential men during the whole process of the conspiracy. He said, "Speak to the elders of Judah, saying, why are you the last to bring the king back to his house? Since the word of the Lord of Israel, the word of all Israel has come to the king, even to his house. You are my brothers. You are my bone and my flesh. Why then should you be the last to bring back the king?" David is now saying a statement. Look, I'm with you. You're my brothers. You're my family. Come back with me. He's leading now. He's in front. He was behind, but now he's up front, and he's inviting all the people. More so, verse 13, he said to Amasa. Amasa was the man, it's actually David's nephew, who helped lead the coup d'etat, the military rebellion against David. And then David says to him, say to Amasa, are you not my bone and my flesh? May God do so to me and more so if you will not be commander of the army before me continue in the place of Joab. Here, David recommissions, Amasa to be the leader of his people, the man who subverted him, the man who stabbed him in the back, David made ruler. And this has a profound effect upon the people. Verse 14, thus he turned the hearts of all the men of Judah as one man. So they sent word to the king saying, return you and all your servants. Wow. Now that's a leader right there, right? Once he was cowered in the corner, now he's up front leading again. And he's leading with heart, right? But let's try and break that down. What does it mean to lead with heart? He's out there. He's risen up. He's speaking with heart to the people. And they see his heart and they follow it, right? Okay, but what kind of heart did David have? Let's ask the questions here. Was David a perfect man? No. That's why we're talking about his sin here. He messed up big time. Did he ever lose heart? Yes. It's hard to follow a man who's made mistakes. It's even harder to follow a man who doesn't have heart. But David didn't have heart either. Was it because the heart that he led with, did David just learn how to compress his emotions? Be a man, suck it up, you can deal with it, deny yourself all those thoughts and feelings? A person who's ever read the Psalms knows that David did not compress his heart. David was what they call today an emotionally healthy man. He knew how to talk about his feelings, cry out to God, not hide them in some closet and think that he'll be better. No, David was a real man. No, what was it about David with heart that made him different? It's this. He knew that in order to lead, he had to have his heart. Meaning, going back to last week, his heart had to be in a right place with God. Had to be in a right place with God. But then further, he also knew that he had to have the courage to face his enemies. And that if he wanted to speak to the hearts of the people, if he wanted to turn the hearts of his people, his heart had to be resurrected from its death. He knew that his heart needed new life. Now today, we don't have time to talk about how, because actually the text doesn't talk about it. You notice it doesn't talk about how David resurrected his heart. You have to go to the Psalms, and we know the answer. The answer is that he appealed to the God who forgives. He appealed to the God whose loving kindness changes not. He appealed that God would redeem him and take not his Holy Spirit away from me. He appealed to that God. That's how he did it. That's how he changed. That's how he rose up again. But today I just want to make the point that David arose again. That David knew that in order to lead, he had to have his heart with him. And the reason I say that, the reason I focus it on that, is because so many hearts are struggling these days. And there are many persons, I'm not speaking of our leadership necessarily at all, but there are many persons who are, in whatever sphere they're in, their heart isn't in it. They're called to be a leader, but their heart's not there. And it needs to be. The heart's got to come back because leadership takes heart. It requires heart. To be emotionally, spiritually present is essential for leadership. And boy, is that hard, isn't it? Because not only when you're not in leadership, but when you're just an ordinary Joe, right? Thinking of the military, it's hard to keep your heart in it. Because people attack you. People hurt you. You hurt yourself. You do wrong things. You knock yourself down. And it's so easy to just pick up that mop and mope around. Oh, woe is me. I made this terrible mistake. And they stay there. I'm never fit to serve again. That's not David. That's not a man with heart. A man with heart knows where his heart is and says, I've got to stand again for the people and take it out there. And I've got to lead with my heart. I've got to get it in the right spot. I've got to repent. I've got to deal with the enemies that I'm afraid of, and I've got to stand again for God's people. I've got to get my heart back in the game. You know, this applies to every sphere. You know that, right? This isn't just church leaders. This is leaders in the home, leaders in business, leaders. But I don't want you to turn it into a secular message. This is a Christian message because the only way you can get your heart right is through Christ. We're just not detailing that this morning. We're talking about the need to stand. I'll settle down here for a second. I'll tell you a story. Many of you do not know, some of you do, that your pastor used to play a lot of basketball. Played a ton of basketball, shot more than 500 shots a day, trying to get good for the next level. And I was getting really serious. My dad saw it. So during my junior to senior year of high school, my dad actually hired an NBA, a former NBA player to train me. Didn't know that, did you? Now, I don't bring that up because, one, I forget his name. And two, he rode the bench. Okay, so NBA player, he got in there, but that was it, okay? He probably played 1 minute every 10 games. But, still, that was a claim to fame. And he trained me, I tell you, and did my athleticism really improve, my ability to make shots. Okay, but that's the reason I bring this all up, because I asked him one day, what was it like to play with those greats? Those wonderful people that are able to do all these moves. And he said, Pete, the best players in the world aren't in the NBA. I said, what? He said, yeah, the best players in the world are in are on some playground here in these big cities. Those are the best players. Those are the best ability. See, what makes a great NBA player is that they know how to play through the pain. They keep their heart in the game, even through the injuries, while they're on the sideline. And they're always wanting to get out and get back in. Beloved, if an NBA player, for the sake of money, success, and whatever you name it, is willing to put his heart back in the game, how much more so shall we who have heaven and all his people to gain? We have far more to gain by getting our heart back in the game than keeping it out and moping around. We need to get up and lead to be men with heart. That through the bumps and bruises, through the scrapes and tragedies, falls, we stand. We keep our heart in it. Now again, I'm not speaking to our current leadership necessarily. I'm speaking to all of us who are being considered for leadership, men. But I want the people in the church to start looking for these type of men. It isn't that if you've fallen, we've all fallen. It isn't if you're scared, we've all been scared. The question is, what are you going to do now? Are you going to stand? Or are you going to sit this one out? A man with heart leads the people, leads his family, leads those around him. That's the man that should be in front of us. Now again, how you do that is repenting. How you do that is through confessing your sin to others that you've harmed. How you do that is stop hiding and actually talk about it. How you do that is you stumble and fall as you continue to step up again. And isn't if you make a mistake in the order of worship, you can be a man of heart and still do that. But what are you doing now? Stand up. Be man of heart. Lead with heart. That's point number one. I'm going to go a little long today. I'm sorry. I'll try my best. But then point number two, a man with heart also, thinking of verses 16 through 23, is a man who has a heart. A man who has a heart. Now, we could go back here to the earlier part of 19 and talk about Amasa and how generous David was there. But I want to press on. And I want to look at the instance of Shimei. Now, you know about Shimei, right? You all know about chapter 16. Just turn there early if you want to in your reading. Shimei was the man who was cursing David as he left. Shimei was of the household of Saul, and when he saw David moping around and leaving the castle out of fear of Absalom, Shimei took the opportunity to just rail at him, throw literally stones at him as he left, cursing him. One of David's men rose up and said, "Shall I kill this dog of a man?" And David says, "No, don't do it. I like, my own summary, I deserve it. I deserve it. The Lord has called this man to do it." But something drastically has changed now. And it has to do with the fact that David's now being called by all of Israel back. Verse 15, he was returning to the land, and they're crossing over the Jordan, and they're met by all the people. And so who's out front? Shimei. And then verse 19, Shimei just calls out the 500-pound elephant, or whatever, how many pounds it is. He says, "Let not my Lord consider me guilty, nor remember," the 500-pound gorilla, that's what it was, "nor remember what your servant did wrong on the day when my Lord, the king, came out from Jerusalem." So the king would not take it to heart. Now pause there. If you don't want someone to remember, why do you say it? Right? Well, Samuel is putting that in there so we know, okay? It's for us. It's a clue for us. That we know that all the wrong that he did. But he didn't want David to take it to heart, literally set it to heart, set it before him as a thing that he's thinking about. For, verse 20, "Your servant knows that I have sinned. Therefore, behold, I have come today, the first of all the house of Joseph," or Benjamin, same idea, "to go down to meet my Lord the king." And what does David do in verse 23? David says, "The king said, 'You shall not die.' Thus the king swore to him." Why? Why did he not kill this man? Especially because in verse 21, Abishai, another nephew of David, son of Zeruiah, said, "Should not Shimei be put to death for this because he's cursed the Lord anointed?" I mean, this is challenging. Put him to death, David. Come on. Let's have a hanging here. But David has heart. And look what he says in verse 22. What have I to do with you, O sons of Zeruiah, that you should this day be an adversary to me? Should any man be put to death in Israel today? For do I not know that I am king over Israel today? Breaking this down, David says a couple of things. He says, my heart was out for vengeance and myself before Bathsheba and Uriah, and I kind of got myself messed up. Not going to do that again. Not going to do that again. It's out for myself, not more. I've learned my lesson. Number two, if I do kill this man, I'm only going to amount to what he cursed me with, a man of bloodshed, 2 Samuel 16. I don't want to amount to the man that he thinks that I am. C, I am the king. Do I not know that I am the king over Israel today? And this man is groveling before me. I think he gets it, that I'm king and that he needs to recognize my kingship. But then lastly, he says, should any man be put to death in Israel today? Today is a day of celebration. God's king is coming back. The people should rejoice. I'm not going to celebrate that with a hanging. I'm not going to celebrate that with blood. This is a day for rejoicing. No man shall be put to death today. Now, the question is, if David has a heart, what kind of heart is that? Now, I was going to take us down the road of compassion and say that David had this really huge heart for people, and he always did what was best for them, and boy, he was just so tender and kind. I would have said that before I read 1 Kings 2, when he tells Solomon to kill him, okay? So, obviously, David's still bearing a grudge here, okay? Obviously, David knows that Shimei needs to die, and oh, by the way, he will. Read that later, 1 Kings 2 and 3. Shimei is going to die. But he doesn't put him to death. Why? David has a heart full of wisdom. And what I mean by wisdom is this, that David knows what is not only good for his own heart, but for all the people. It isn't that he has this secret intuition, but he's able to discern in the moment what is going to carry everyone around. Not in a wrong direction, but the right direction. It's where a leader knows that he has a heart and passions. He also has knowledge, but he wants the two to come together, where that knowledge and wisdom leads his heart. He doesn't fly off the handle. We got to do this. No. What is happening? What's wisdom say? Yes, all of this, but how is this going to affect this person and that person? He's not worried about Facebook, okay? He didn't even have Facebook back then. All right, but he's thinking about what is best for all the people right now. That's a man who has a heart of wisdom, who's thinking about everyone. And let me tell you, I've seen this happen. I've seen this in the session. I've seen it. I'm not going to say who it is, okay? But there was this moment where I was pulling my hair out. I don't have much hair up. You don't see that, but I don't have much hair back here. I was pulling out my hair because I was reaching my limit with a certain individual. We were patiently loving this individual, trying to show them their sin, trying to shepherd them. This wasn't a fellowship session member. It was a shepherding discipline moment, kind of like the shepherding we taught in Sunday school. We were caring for the heart, but this heart didn't want it. And it was up here for me, all right? I was done. And just as I was about to just let it out, not like a velvet hammer, but like a sledgehammer coming down, someone else spoke before me. And that person, when they spoke, talked of grace, talked about the power of the Holy Spirit, talked about how Jesus Christ can forgive even the greatest of sinners, of which he personally attested to, and that God can do a work in you despite the history and the problems you have. Boy, I was glad I didn't speak, because when he spoke, just grace came out. And you know what? It won over my heart. It won over the man's heart who was being defiant, and he's calmed down. And it prevailed in everyone else's heart, and we were just looking at a heart full of wisdom put on the table. And I was thankful for that man. We have men with a heart full of wisdom. But we need more men. Now, how do you get a heart like that? You know, some would say, hey, how old is David here? David's likely in his 60s. Well, you got to be 60 before you get that heart of wisdom. Well, then your pastor would be disqualified, because I'm 41. I wouldn't be good. Don't want to go that way. What ways could we go? Could we say that it's not necessarily a function of age, but of when trials and struggles come, how does that person deal with it? How does that heart grow? How does that heart press on towards Christ? How does that heart lead people? How does that heart apply the wisdom of God's word? And do you see it amongst the people? You see their heart. That's a person who has wisdom beyond their years. That's a man with heart that is called to lead despite his age. How do you deal with problems? Are you the person in the first point, like David, still cowering in the corner? A heart full of wisdom says, God gave this to me to work out for my good and my sanctification. What's going to come about? What's going to happen in my family's life? What's going to happen in my kids' life? What's going to be the good thing that God does and presses on? That's what has to happen. This is the type of man we're looking for, yes, and the man we need to be. That's the man who's filled with the Spirit, another word. That's a man who's filled with love for God and for others, another word. That's a man with heart. Church, these are the men we need to find. These are the men we need to pray for. These are the men that we need to be, because ultimately, if there's a church filled with these type of men and women, it's going to be a great church. Amen? Let's pray together.